Hello everybody, my name is Sharon Sherry and welcome to our paranormal panel with Nalini, Singh, Amanda Bouchet and Darynda Jones. Ladies, welcome. So this is for our romantic rendezvous locked down, and before I get into the questions, some of which have been sent in by our readers, I'll give you the short form bios for our ladies. Please feel free to visit all of their websites to pick up the full version, and Darynda's is especially funny, I have to say. So, about Amanda. Amanda grew up in New England, where she spent much of her time tromping around into the woods and making up grand adventures in her head. It was inevitable that one day she would start writing them down. Drawing on her Greek heritage for the setting and on her love of all things daring and romantic for the rest, her debut trilogy, The Kingmaker Chronicles, took form. She writes what she loves to read: epic exploits, steamy romance and characters that make you laugh and cry. Her first novel, A Promise of Fire, won several Romance Writers of America chapter contests, including the Orange Rose contest and the Paranormal category of the prestigious Golden Pen. Amanda is a French master's graduate and former English teacher. She lives in Paris, France, with her 2 bilingual children, who she feels will soon be correcting her French.
They already are.
Darynda. For reasons known only to the big guy upstairs, New York Times and USA Today best-selling author Darynda won both the Golden Heart and a Rita for her manuscript First Grave on the Right. But even before that, she couldn't remember a time she wasn't putting pen to paper. She actually started at the age of 5 and tortured her poor mother. Darynda thought all was well with life and writing, and then she graduated and real life came crashing through. She forced the dream aside, got married to a local rock star and had at least 2 kids that she can think of. Life happened for a number of years, including a return to university. But bit by bit, the desire to write needled its way back to the surface. She couldn't squelch it any longer, and she started writing again in 2002 with one goal in mind: to grab that publishing contract. Unfortunately, she sucked at it. Thank goodness that practice makes perfect, and 3 manuscripts later, she won the Golden Heart, landed an amazing agent and sold to St. Martin's Press. She lives in the land of enchantment, also known as New Mexico, with her husband of almost 30 years and her 2 beautiful sons, the mighty, mighty Jones boys. We have a New Zealand show, don't we, Nalini, called the Mighty Joneses?
Johnsons.
Mighty
Johnsons, yeah.
And last but not least, Nalini. Nalini was born in Fiji, raised in New Zealand. She spent 3 years living and working in Japan, where she took the chance to travel around Asia. She's a resident in New Zealand these days, but she's always plotting new trips. Coronavirus aside. Nalini's had a few different jobs: a lawyer, a librarian, a candy factory general hand, a bank temp and an English teacher, but not necessarily in that order. Some might call that inconsistency, but Nalini calls it grist for the writer's mill. All experiences are good. Nalini has also been writing for as long as she can remember. All of her stories held a thread of romance, even when she was writing about a prince who could shoot lasers out of his eyes. Creating new, unique characters and giving them happy endings is her favourite thing. She even loves those voices in her head. And so there's no other job she'd rather be doing. When she got the call in September 2002 that Silhouette Desire wanted to buy her first book, Desert Warrior, it was a dream come true. Nalini hopes to continue living the dream until she keels over of old age on her keyboard. Here's to that. Works for me. Stay in the cave. All right. Now, we're lucky enough to have a panel who writes amazing characters, amazing worlds, and some of them across several different series. So my first question is, you all do write series, some of them with many books within the one arc. What draws you to writing a series? We'll start with you, Amanda, please.
Well, I think that it's partly because I like a story that's really big, and I sort of accidentally ended up in a trilogy because as I was writing, I just realized it was never going to fit into one book, or if it did, it would be a very long book. And since I was a debut author at the time, that would be a bit problematic to try and sell to a publisher as an unknown author. A fantasy romance that was, you know, a huge chunk of book probably wouldn't be considered. So, but I had this big story I wanted to tell. So I just decided not to try and fit it into one book, but to split it over 3. And then my publisher liked that format from me. So when I started a new series, it was just sort of automatically that it would be a trilogy also, and carrying on with the same main characters throughout, rather than a series where you have secondary characters to become the main characters afterwards. Although I do plan on using secondary characters from my original trilogy, the Kingmaker Chronicles, to start some new books in that series. So it will be a continuing series as well.
That'll be exciting for readers. Yeah, I wouldn't. Darynda's clapping. What about you?
Exciting for me too.
I'm sorry, who?
Darynda.
Oh, me. Okay, sorry. I love series because I fall in love with the characters and I just want to read more and more about them. And that's the same with mine. I just fall in love with my characters. And then as I'm writing one book, you know, I'm constantly thinking of, oh, you know, this could happen, but it can't happen in this book because, you know, I already have a full book. So it just keeps going on and on. With every book I write, I just think more and more ahead. And yeah, and also part of that too is that ending a series, even if it's just a trilogy, is like the hardest thing on the planet because you have to wrap all this stuff up. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to keep going.
Nalini. What about you?
Mine's this amalgam of Darynda's and Amanda's answers. Basically, I fall in love with my characters, and also I love exploring the developing relationships over time. So, you know, my Guild Hunter series, you basically follow one couple over multiple books. With the Size Changing series, it's multiple couples over multiple books. But even when it's different couples per book, I'm still getting to see each relationship change over a long period of time because they're coming in and out of the books. So that's one element. And the other element, of course, is these massive overarching storylines, which I love to tell, because I think there's just something, I don't know, fascinating for me to write those storylines. And I'm a big series reader as well, and that's what I love when I read. You know, all the jigsaw puzzles sort of coming together, and then when you get to the end of a story arc or the end of a trilogy or end of a series, you have the completed piece, and it's so satisfying, both as a reader and as a writer.
Thank you. We'll talk about the couples in your books and keeping them fresh and evolving a little later. The next question is, you've all built such amazing worlds, so let's settle into world building for a little bit. Was the opportunity to take your story anywhere you wanted, because it's your world, right, part of the attraction to paranormal and fantasy writing? We'll start with Darynda on this one.
You know, the thing about paranormal that's so fun is, yeah, I mean, you can make anything up. And as long as you believe it and your characters believe it, you know, you can have the most bizarre situation, but it's the way you write it, you know, that makes it completely believable. And it's so funny because if I have somebody write me and say, I didn't believe this or that, it's something every day. And I'm, oh, but you believe about the Grim Reaper and the son of Satan. That's okay. But this whole thing that's completely, I took off the news that was totally true, you know, or something like that. It's hilarious. But absolutely, with paranormal worlds, you can make it up as you go. And of course, you don't want to cheat the reader. You don't want to throw something in like at the end and say, oh, this because of this, you know. But I think and as writers, our creative juices just get flowing and we just can do anything. It's just so fun. You can go in any direction and do anything. Yeah.
Nalini?
Yeah, it's a wide open canvas, and it's just incredible to go wherever the imagination takes me. The other thing I do like about it is, despite the fact it's an open canvas at the start, once we've created the canvas, once we've laid the story down, then it's about following the rules we've laid down, what Darynda said about not cheating the reader. You know, so once we've constructed the world, then finding room to tell stories within that world, following the rules of that world, that's really interesting, and it's challenging, and it's constantly evolving. So yeah, the other thing I'll say is I love historicals. I read a lot of historicals, but when I tried to write one, I realized I was just making stuff up all the time because I didn't want to do the research. So so I made my own history, and then now I have to keep track of it. But yeah, it's fun. It's just a lot of fun.
Amanda?
Well, Nalini and Darynda pretty much said it all there. I like Nalini's idea of a blank canvas because that's sort of how I feel about it too. You start with the first brush stroke, and then you add another layer on top of that and another layer on top of that until you've got this really complex, multi-layered world. But you do have rules that you need to follow because you've established them, and you have to, and in order for your reader to feel that it's credible, even if it's completely incredible, you have to sort of stick to your own system. You can't just splatter paint willy-nilly over your canvas either. So I really enjoy that multi-level building, and I'm not really a plotter. I'm more sort of right by the seat of my pants. So I'm building those levels as I go and kind of discovering them in real time, which is fun too. But then I have to keep it all sort of in a backlog of notes in my memory and everything so that I'm building coherently on top of that as well. And I just love being able to take my imagination and go anywhere with it because I am the one creating the rules. So I think that's the most fun part of writing fantasy.
So do you all keep book Bibles that kind of keep you on track with, you know, hair colour, eye colour, where they're living, what they're doing?
Yes, for me, yes, I do. It's, I mean, after, so the Side Changing series began in 2006. It's still going, so that's quite a few years. I'm counting in my head, 15 years. So at that point, you know, there does need to be a Bible of some kind. But the reference material, the original reference material, it's always the books. So even though I keep notes in a Bible, I always double check against the material in the books every time I'm mentioning something where I'm like, a lot of it is still in my head. I don't need to look it up. But where I am sort of wanting to refresh myself on something, I look at the material in the book. And that's partly because of my writing style, which is I write a lot and I delete a lot. And so sometimes I might think I said something in a book, but I deleted it. So I always go back to the books to make sure that the information I assume the reader has is actually information that they do have.
Smart. All right.
I keep a character chart with the basic information and what they are and what they know and what they do, and of course physical and all of that. And then I have an incredible continuity editor, and I'm constantly asking her, even with Sunshine, I had to ask her a question. I'm only working on the second book, and I had to write her, and I'm like, okay, now does Levi know this? What do you think? You know? So yeah, I'm constant. She's like my walking book Bible. I have to ask her everything.
Unlike you, I have sort of character notes, and it's just sort of a Word document, and I can add to it when there's a new character, and it keeps track mostly of physical traits, a little bit personality. And then like Nalini, I'll often refer to the book, not really for the same reasons as I do write and delete also, but for the moment, of course, I don't have 15 years of books to think about either yet, but it's more, I kind of go back, I dive into a few pages, and it gives me a feel for something again, even if I'm not specifically saying, oh, did he have blue eyes or something. It's more of a general picture, and I'll look back in a past book for that, and then be able to, it'll sort of unblock something for the next section I'm writing in the current book.
Okay. Yes. One of our readers, Danielle Hilliard, has asked, do you research the folklore of paranormal creatures, and how do you include this in your worlds if you do? Let's start with Nalini.
So I see, because most of my stuff has a little bit, or it's completely made up. Like I change stuff all the time. I have SF elements. So, but funnily enough, you know, I write about in the Side Changing series, the Psi have these incredible mental abilities. And in high school, I did this senior, so not leaving like a junior, I did a senior science project on like telepathy, and I like did the tests and everything. And so I did actually have like a whole bunch of research behind me there about, I made my friends do those flashcards, you know, do you know what I'm thinking? And it was awesome. It was, I mean, I didn't get an A, but it was fun. And so I guess, yeah, there's a little bit of research. I don't sort of think about it as research as such, because a lot of it is interest, just stuff I'm fascinated by. And so over a lifetime, I've absorbed a lot of material, and then I've put my own twist on it. I tend to research more, in particular, real world things. Like, for example, I researched glacial erratic boulders in Yosemite National Park. It's like it ended up one line in the book, but I now know all about them. but yeah, I tend to focus more on the real verifiable scientific information for research, whereas with the paranormal elements, again, we're talking about that blank canvas, so it's about taking something that exists for me and just going with my own spin on it.
Amanda?
Well, this is a definite yes for me if we're talking about researching mythological creatures, because my first series, The Kingmaker Chronicles, is steeped in Greek mythology. So there was a lot of research that went into the gods and the legends and the mythological creatures of that ancient world. And so if I ever wanted to use something like that, of course, I'd look up the name and the characteristics. I wouldn't necessarily, I was doing a retelling of Greek mythology in a fantasy world of my own creation. So I didn't have to stick to the facts as we know them necessarily, but they were still based in something. And then I could take them in my own direction to sort of create a new mythos around ancient Greece, in terms of, all the things that apply in a new way to my world and my characters. But yes, there was definitely a ton of research that went into especially mythological creatures, because I wanted to use some that were well known, but others that were less well known. And even to me, they were less well known. And then it was fun to dive into that and see what they were all about, and then how I could fit them into my story.
Darynda?
I do as far as the paranormal aspects, my research is very superficial. So I go in just to learn kind of like what's what, and then I make it up. I put my own twist on it, like with the Grim Reaper. So Charlie's the Grim Reaper, and yeah, she's nothing like any Grim Reaper out there. So yeah, I do a little bit of research, but I'm like Nalini in that I have to research real world stuff way more often and way deeper. And with the Sunshine books, I had to research, just for an example, search and rescue. And I had no idea how complex that is. You don't just call somebody and say, hey, we need to search for this missing kid. There are layers upon layers upon layers of even what law enforcement officials have to go through to get a search and rescue started. So it's very interesting. And I actually, that will slow me up more than anything. It's real world stuff.
You'd all be really awesome at trivia. Now, I'm guessing the answer to this is no, but if you could change one thing about any of the worlds you've created, what would it be? Because they're all set now.
They're all set. I did one thing in the very last Charlie book that was just stupid. All I had to do was change one line and it would have fixed everything. And I went in a different direction. And so every once in a while I get an email about that. And it concerns, for those of you who are Charlie fans, it's about Uncle Bob. All I had to do was change one line and it would have all made sense. And I didn't do it. Otherwise, no, it's absolute. I wouldn't change anything.
Amanda?
No, I don't think so, because in the end, it all comes together to be the story that I wanted it to be. Sometimes I don't feel like the characters are perfect, but they're not meant to be. They're meant to mess up and learn from it and then do better and become better people and grow in terms of individuals and in terms of the relationship that I've created throughout this trilogy. So for it all to end up where I wanted it to, no, I guess I wouldn't change anything. But I don't necessarily love everything the characters did, but that was for a reason too. It was to end up where they ended up.
Okay. And Nalini, you've got several worlds. Anything you'd draw?
No, I think I'm of the belief it is what it is. and yeah, we work with it. Of course, there are bits and pieces that usually typos and things like that annoy me to this day, and I wish I could go back and fix in every single book and every single copy in the world. And there's one thing, like Darynda said, that line. There is a line I wish I had written differently, and this is hilarious because this is I think I counted the books have so this is in the Side Changing series. I think there's something like 2 million words written or something, and there's this one that sort of niggles at me. But even with that, it's, yeah, it is what it is, and all of those flaws make it what it is. And so going back and changing it might just get rid of, you know, like sometimes you make something too shiny and then it no longer has that uniqueness to it, you know, that the flaws give it. And so the flaws aren't actually flaws, they're part, what are they called? I'm not finding the word, but it's like it's character, you know, it's part of the character of the series. So no, I wouldn't change it. And I also think what I said before, once I build a world, I have to work within the world I've created. So part of the challenge and the joy of it is working within whatever I've said before. So that's why I also don't want to go back and change.
Fair
because
enough.
It's not about making things easier. Because I think a good series is where there are things where it's like, how's the writer going to fix this mess that they've created? So yeah.
Okay. Let's move to the couples in your books or your series. As a romance is all about a couple, how do you maintain that couple across multiple books, keeping them fresh, interesting, growing, and evolving throughout a series? When you've got, you know, you've got a series that's 4 or 5 books long, some people think, oh, you know, move on, whatever. But when you can keep them fresh, readers keep coming back. So we might start with Amanda on that one.
Well, I think there are lots of things, but right now what's coming to me is the flaws in the characters. They start out flawed enough that there's so much room to grow. And so even if they get past one hurdle, then there'll be another. And whether it's coming from their relationship or from an external conflict, it can be both, well, you know, one after another or both, everything all at once. But I think to keep a couple fresh and interesting, it's not about keeping them always in conflict with each other, but it's about having them grow and overcome flaws and difficulties, and at each step, maybe do that a little more together and as a team. And that's what I try and do with my characters, is they're coming from different places and different perspectives, and as they grow as a couple, they come together, and their teamwork becomes something more, so much more important to the story as well. And I think that's partly what helps keep them fresh, is a new obstacle and how do they overcome it. And each time they overcome it, do they overcome it better and as a team better than the time before?
Darynda, would you add anything to that?
That's it, exactly. That's exactly what I was gonna say. Yeah, that's the only, because I had that question too, even when I started like the Charlie and Rhea series, you know, that was my big question. I was like, how do these writers keep these characters so fresh and this relationship fresh? And that was it exactly. It just to, you know, work on this flaw and that flaw. And I love what Amanda said about them working more as a team as it goes along. So perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. Nalini, anything different from you on that?
A little bit. So I agree with what both of Amanda and Darynda said. I answer specifically for the Guild Hunter series. So one of the reasons my brain started thinking of that series was I was seeing these stories where an immortal or someone, you know, hundreds of years old would get together with a human, and yet they'd be on an equal footing almost from the start, like the way they were interacting. And so for me, it was like, no, hold on. You know, if someone's 1,000 years old and they're together with a 20-something-year-old, it's not an equal footing. You know, like I wanted to know what it would take to get them on an equal footing. So for me, specifically in the paranormal sense, that type of relationship I wanted to explore. And I think that's where the freshness comes in, because it is a constant evolution, their relationship, because they start out like one is all powerful and one is very little power. And then it's getting to this equilibrium where you truly believe that they are in love and that their love will survive everything the world throws at them. So, and that's still ongoing, you know, their relationship has changed so much from Angel's Blood to the more recent books. So, and I think that's going to continue to grow, because with each book, each of them grows into their power, and that influences how they are in their relationship as well.
Thank you. So staying with Nalini, what, if anything, do you find most difficult about writing in the fantasy paranormal world?
Probably keeping track of things after a while.
Yeah.
So some of it depends on the book. So say I write a book deeper into a series, and then it's about characters who've been in multiple books before. At that point, you know, the continuity checks for that book might take me a week. When I'm doing, at the end of my edits, I'm doing the double check to make sure. And I'm actually really paranoid. Like, I know a lot of stuff, but I still triple check myself always, just in case. So I guess that's, I guess that is the hardest, but it's not. And when I say that, I want to say that I love everything about what I do. So when I say it's the hardest, it's just the hardest of the things I enjoy doing regardless. So it's fun to go back in the books, and then sometimes I end up reading, you know, a whole chapter. Like, oh, I forgot about this little bit, and yeah. But yeah, it's just those tiny details, because readers read books back to back sometimes. So they might read like 6 or 7 books in a row, whereas I wrote those books 6 or 7 years apart, you know. And so it's like I have to get it so that if they can flow seamlessly from book 4 to book 5 to book 6 to book 7. Yeah.
Thank you. Amanda, what about you?
Well, I agree with that. It's a little hard to keep track of everything, and that's why we have to make notes and and look back in the books. Something I find a little hard and time consuming is coming up with names for things. Characters, places, different objects that wouldn't, you know, is maybe based on something we might know of, but I can't just call it whatever we call it because it's not our world and it has to be new and original. And sometimes just naming a place or a person or a type of thing will just take hours of my time because I want it to be original, not difficult to pronounce, easy to remember, but not boring either. There's a weird balance there, and I find that a little bit, you know, hard to find that balance and get the right names in there.
Thank you. Darynda, anything different for you?
Those are both of mine, especially the detail thing, but the names too. I didn't even think of that, but oh my God. It's so hard. And a lot of times I don't even, when I'm writing my first draft, I don't even put the names because I'm like, oh, I gotta come up with another name. So I just put asterisks, you know, and then I have to go back and name all these people. And then of course I name people the same, or like 10 people their names will start with a B, and I have to go back and change it. So yeah, I didn't even think of that, but absolutely those 2 things.
Okay. So what are the delights and difficulties of switching it up and over to change genres or subgenres? We might stay with Darynda for that one.
Oh gosh, you know, it's so funny because I was just talking about the fact that I got very comfortable in the Charlie Davidson world. I would jump into a book. I knew the world. I had no problems. And so when I started writing A Bad Day for Sunshine, which is a whole new, it's a trilogy, completely different, and it is not paranormal. I mean, there's a touch of paranormal, but it's not, it's pretty much straight like romantic mystery, if that's a thing. And even though it's set in our world, I mean, I made the town up, but it's set in our world, an everyday world. I had the hardest time coming up with just the world, like my town and what's going on and this character and what this character does. I didn't realize how comfortable I had become in Charlie's world until I started writing in different things again. I have like 1,000 story ideas, but to really get nitty gritty and get those details down, that was way more interesting than I thought. It was more challenging, I should say, than I thought it was going to be. But it was also a delight. And of course, I fell in love with my characters, and I'm working on the second book now, and it's what it is. I always fall in love with my characters.
Amanda.
Well, I have only 2 series for the moment, the Kingmaker Chronicles with the Greek mythology-based fantasy world, and the Night Chaser series with, it's sort of a futuristic fantasy where you have a sort of a Star Wars type universe and a Robin Hood type crew of rebel thieves. And I actually found it easier to write in the Night Chaser world, the futuristic fantasy, because I wasn't quite as limited in language. For my first series, for example, I chose not to use curse words except for made up things. Since it's this Greek-based world, for example, a swear would be son of a cyclops. So I ended up limiting myself to only things based in that world. And the language was a little more, you couldn't put in modern stuff. There wasn't anything related to our own worlds with technology or things that we can relate to. So that's the one thing I found, because in terms of character and emotion and, you know, the big stories with a lot of overarching plot carrying through several books, all of that didn't really change for me. But in terms of the actual language, I felt really freed up when I went into something that was more futuristic and based in a world that was an extension of our own worlds, just in the future, rather than an absolutely contained fantasy world of its own making.
Thank you. And then Nalini.
I do like doing different things because I feel like it refreshes me as a writer, going from one to the other. I guess the biggest shift I've done recently is writing some thrillers, so New Zealand-based thrillers. And the biggest challenge there was sticking to a thriller plot line. So instead of sort of drifting back into the romance type of things, because that's what I normally write. And so the first book, Madness of Sunshine, does have a small romantic thread. But I'm finding, as I work on my second book, Quiet in Her Bones, the second thriller, it's easier to stick to the thriller. Like I can switch now between, because in between working on Quiet in Her Bones, I had copy edits for Archangel's Son, which is, you know, it's urban fantasy, but it's more romantic urban fantasy. And then I switched back to this, and it's okay. It's like my brain has those muscles now. It's like developing them better, and that's one of the things I love about switching it up, because I feel like each time I try it, I'm growing and I'm flexing those muscles a little bit more and adding to the tools in my writer's toolbox. So yeah, it's fun. It's just especially with the very first book, I did have to think a little bit more consciously, as opposed to just, I'm very organic as a writer, not a big plotter kind of thing. But with that book, you know, I did have to sit down and think, okay, if I'm writing a thriller, how do thrillers work? And I've read a lot, but, you know, I'm not the kind of person who sits down and deconstructs things necessarily. But I did have to have that sort of moment at the start and really think about what I was trying to do.
Thank you. All right. My next question is, if you were meeting someone for the first time who'd never read any of your books, where would you suggest they start? Let's start with Darynda.
I would say the first Charlie book, probably, First Grave on the Right. I also have the YA series, and I have A Bad Day for Sunshine, and which I think is so funny because I came out with A Bad Day for Sunshine almost the same time that Nalini came out with A Madness of Sunshine. Like we had sunshine on the brain. I thought that was really cool. But I would say First Grave on the Right for me.
Nalini?
I think it's going to depend on what kind of reader they are. If they like paranormal at all, I would say Slave to Sensation, because that's where a lot of people found me, really, launched my career into sort of the next level. But there are people in my life who are like, oh, I just can't deal with reading a romance by you, so for them I would say try A Madness of Sunshine, because it's a thriller. And then if you're just seriously a contemporary reader, don't really want to dip your toe into the paranormal yet, I would say go for Rock Hard, which is one of my contemporaries, and it's one that a lot of people really, really love, and all the contemporaries stand alone, so you might as well, you can dive in anywhere, so might as well start with that one.
I disagree with you there. I think start at the beginning of the Rock series and go on through.
Okay.
And Amanda, what about you?
Well, I think either series is a good place to start, as long as you start with book one, because they're not truly meant to stand alone. So you need to start at the beginning of the trilogy. And so if a reader is more interested in mythology and magic and battles and dragons, then they should start with A Promise of Fire, the first book in the Kingmaker Chronicles. And if they like a Star Wars ambiance and a futuristic setting and sort of space heists and rebels, then they should start with Night Chaser, which is the first book in Australia, they're calling it the Endeavor series. In the US, they're calling it a Night Chaser series, but it's easy to find either way.
Okay, and that's thanks to Malvina for that question. Our next question comes from Danielle Hilliard, and she says, what is your favourite paranormal creature and why? Let's start with Nalini.
No way to choose. I mean, that's why it's so fun because we have so many things to choose from. So I'm just going to be like, all of them?
It's okay. Amanda?
I'm not sure that I have a favorite paranormal creature, but I do like stories with dragons. I'll always be happy to see a unicorn. I guess, are we talking mythological or just paranormal? Anything. I mean, I like a good werewolf too, so no, I don't really have a favorite, but I do like dragons, I have to say. So I guess I'll go with dragons.
Darynda.
I do have a favorite, but there's a reason. I love all paranormal. I love all mythical. I love them all, and I have stories in all of them. I even love zombies. I love zombie stories. Well, I don't love zombies, but I love zombie stories.
Same for the werewolf thing.
Right, yeah. Although Warm Bodies, if you read or saw Warm Bodies, that might change your mind. But I will say, when I was probably 5 years old, so this is going to get weird, but my dad died when I was 6, okay? Well, when I was about 5, the first scary movie I had ever seen was about vampires. And I was scared to death. And this is whenever you have the little tiny TV and it was black and white. I know I'm dating myself. And my dad was sitting on the chair behind me. I was on the floor, and he knew I was scared to death. I was like freaking out of this vampire. And so he told me, he said, come here. And so I get up on his lap and he wraps me up, and then I'm fine. Well, I guess it must have been around Halloween or something. So like the next day we go to this little convenience store in our area, and the clerk, okay, is dressed as Dracula. And he took my hand. I was just like staring at him like Godsmacked, you know. He took my hand and kissed my hand, and that was it. I love vampires. I will always love vampires. It's one of those things. And I have 1,000 vampire stories I want to write. So someday I will write vampires.
That's such a cool story.
That is indeed a cool story, and a lovely place to end our time together today, ladies. Thank you so much for your generosity in time and in the information, and sharing your writing process and how you've come up with the worlds that we all enjoy. Before we head off, I'll ask you to hold up your treasure hunter sheets for our viewers, just a little bit closer so they can read them. Perfect. Thank you so much. That's it. That's all we need. They can stop the recording. Thank you all so much for your time. Amanda, good night. It's so late in your world now. Nalini, have a great day. Darynda, have a great rest of your afternoon. And thank you all for your time.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Sharon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.